Hello and welcome to the I3 lecture series hosted by the Masters in Digital Photography here at the School of Visual Arts. I'm Julie Graham. Tonight I am excited to introduce Nicky Quamina-Woo as our penultimate lecturer of 2025. Prior to becoming a photographer herself, Nicky was an art director for brands such as Ralph Lauren, Christian Dior, Ann Taylor and Target, where she was on the hiring side. After 10 years, she made the move to documentary photography, and her current work focuses on human unrest and social justice. Nicky is the recipient of a Nikon Marilyn Stafford photo reportage grant, as well as an awardee of the inaugural Reuters Storytelling grant for her work on a Tanzania-based project about the intersection of Western medicine and witchcraft. Her clients include the New York Times, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, CNN, Human Rights Watch, Facebook, NPR, Apple, Vogue Italia, the Melinda French Gates Foundation, and Reporters Beyond Borders. Nicky is also a member of Women Photograph, Diversify Photo, Black Women Photograph, and Authority Collective. Please let's give it up for Nicky Woo.
Thank you. So I'm a little freaked out talking in front of a group. So Julie and I thought it would be easiest if I just made slides that I could kind of read from, at least for the first little bit, and then we'll switch to just me talking about photos. So my mom is Creole Jamaican, and my dad is a Chinese Pacific Islander. Around 3, my parents divorced, and then I began splitting time between LA and New York. My mom remarried a soul musician who basically raised me at around 5. That's my dad, the Chinese guy, who raised me, and I took his last name after my dad passed away. So that's where the Wu comes from. I'm a little Chinese, but really I'm Native Hawaiian, and Black is mostly what I go with. So I grew up around just these crews of Black musicians, and then, my Chinese dad, just kind of hanging out. I have his 2 brothers are John and Roger Wu, who are both design directors for Wu Art, which was just on 19th Street. Both uncles were married to Filipino women, one who's a playwright, Jessica Hagedorn, who worked and performed alongside Black feminist writers like Ntozake Shange and Tulani Davis at the Public Theater. I have another set of uncles from my mom's side who are Black, one who's a writer who worked for years in Rikers prison trying to teach poetry to inmates as a way to explore their pain. And my other uncle opened a bunch of halfway houses in Boston to help Black youth regain their sense of safety and care. And that's Jessica Hagedorn. That's my papa, his brother, his sister, and my dad again. Because a fair number of my family are Asians who hung out with Black creatives and vice versa, gay men and a lot of ladies in drag, because that was who my mom hung out with, I assumed and was sort of treated like my mixedness was a natural extension of culture, like an extension of both sides, except for, we all have one racist auntie who was Asian and definitely was like, you're a little too Black, don't go in the sun, that kind of thing. But everyone else was, it just seems normal. Even though I realized my family looked a little different, I still kind of assumed that the rest of the country wasn't that far off, at least politically, right? Because I hung out with tons of gay men and ladies in drag as a kid. So I sort of learned that ethnicity was this vibrant and dynamic aspect that we all kind of carried, which obviously is not true in the rest of the country, or not something that people connect to. So usually it was just me with a bunch of grown-ups, and they, particularly in the 80s and 90s, they just kind of put you in a corner and went off and did their own thing. So I read a lot, because what else do you do when everyone else is, at an adult party or concert or whatever? I went to Paradise Garage as a kid. I went to, Studio 54, all the things, right? They just kind of put me on the side and were like, you're good, and did their thing. Times have changed. But because some of my uncles saw that I liked to read, they immediately started bringing me, Toni Morrison, The Bluest Eye, which I read by the 5th grade, Toni Cade Bambara, Richard Wright, Zora Neale Hurston by junior high. my junior high school, which I went to in New York, also was really interested in teaching us Black history. So I learned really early on about Nat Turner's Rebellion, the internment camps, you know, Malcolm X, obviously, Harriet Tubman. And interestingly, I went to high school like for a year in Texas, and the entirety of Black history was like 2 paragraphs in, you know, an entire textbook, which was really stark for me because I had come from New York, where that's all we studied for at least 2 or 3 years. So yeah, felt a little different. And I think that both New York and LA are really special places, and particularly back then, because all these cultures were kind of buttressed together, which I'm sure you guys remember. And I don't know if that changed because you grow older and so we sort of naturally pull back, or if that is just because the cities themselves have been raised by capitalism. I'm not sure. My fan groups broke out by musical and dance interest rather than race, like in most cities in the States. There were freestyle kids, all the hip hop kids, obviously, and house music folks, which is what I was part of, like Chicago Underground morphed in with gospel in New York. And in New York, nightclubs didn't card either, which was incredible. So 14 years old, 15 years old, we were getting into all the same parties that older people were at, right? We didn't do drugs, we just danced a lot. Promoters were okay with us because we filled the dance floor and sort of made it vibrant, I think. That's why, I don't know. And I think the thing that sets New York apart for me is that we weren't, particularly when I talked to friends from other cities women who felt that they had to be overtly feminine and where whiteness was centered, I didn't feel that in New York, right? Because all the kids that I hung out with were a bunch of folks of different ethnicities, and they were just trying to be cool rather than fit into like normative Americanness, which I think is really, really special, and particularly because I travel so much now. I was living in Colombia for a little bit, and because I would wear sneakers and jeans and just look, you know, bummy, we live in New York, it's fine. A lot of women immediately assumed that I was homeless or just something was wrong with me because they were all wearing these cute little flowered buttoned outfits and, you know, little kitten heels, and I would, like, we don't wear kitten heels in New York unless you're going to some event or something, like you're riding the subway, why would you do that? And so I think that that is something that is incredibly beautiful about having been a teen in New York City. I went to college at Boston University for freshman year. These are the freshman dorms, Orin Towers, and so it's 3 towers of just freshmen. And I think Boston, it's an easy city for young people because it's really navigable. But for me, the class sizes were too big. Like, my parents didn't really talk to me about what school I should go to. I knew I kind of, you know, I had an uncle who lived in Boston. I thought it would be fine. But these massive gallery lectures were kind of overwhelming for me. But more than that, there were these very odd race relations. So yeah, obviously a ton of white students, but whatever, I'm from New York and LA. I went to some fraternity keg parties. Super, super, super basic. I didn't realize it would be that obvious. But I didn't understand before that how when I would get on the subway with a friend who was darker hued, you'd see white people's eyes just like a part of their brain just completely shut off. And it didn't happen when I got on the T by myself, and it only happened when I was with darker friends, men or women. And I had never actually witnessed that before, which was really, really shocking to me. And so I kept asking people about it, and my uncle and friends, like, how can you live here? What's that like for you? And mostly people just stared at me like I was mad. They were like, what are you talking about? This is just how it is, which I think is probably true in the rest of the country. And maybe it's just, I could totally be talking from a place of privilege, obviously, but because New York had so many like Puerto Rican and Dominicans, and right, there's this entire shade or gamut of color here that folks just kind of are like, yeah, whatever. So, I mean, a couple things were really cool about Boston. I don't want to totally denigrate it. I got to camp. I went to bread and puppet theater shows, and I followed the Grateful Dead for a summer, which I think, yeah, like I think I'm really interested, obviously I'm really interested in anthropology, but I don't think I realized that at the time. One of my uncles got us tickets for the Dead, and I didn't go, it was me and a friend, and we didn't go into the concert because I didn't care about the music, which makes no sense, right? Like, there was this entire scene, and I'm sure some of you know, of just these young people who would bus from town to town to follow the Dead. They'd share food and apples and sit with each other and commune, and I thought that that was incredible. Like, I've never seen anything like that before, particularly being from a city kid. So I thought that was, now that I'm much older and I do documentary, I look back on it, I'm like, oh yeah, that tracks, right? That's why I would do that. I transferred to NYU the next year though, because it's New York. I was a psych major. My mom is lovely, but a deep narcissist. So I had this throbbing need to sort of understand other people, I guess, and I had a minor in sociology. But as I started to get close to graduation, I realized that I didn't want to become a therapist because I kept imagining that I would be talking to like bankers who did too much coke and slept with sex workers and were like, why is my life shitty? And I thought, like, that doesn't seem like a great way to live. And I have friends that are social workers who also, they're just constantly constrained by the system, and I thought that's not a great place, a great choice. So I took a bunch of communication classes, video editing, broadcast video, photography, film, and realized it was more up my alley. Which is weird, so I think because I grew up with a bunch of art people, it would have made sense that I just knew that I was interested in art, but I thought all that time that artist meant traditional artist, painter or sculptor, and my brother is a painter. And so because I was none of those things, I always just assumed that I couldn't do art, which, years later I'm like, oh yeah, that's, that was the first photo I ever took. I was very proud. So I transferred to San Francisco Art Institute in San Francisco, obviously. And I didn't know anything about it. I just read that Ansel Adams and Minor White, Imogen Cunningham started that program. Man Ray used to teach there. Leibowitz went there for undergrad. So I think it was an amazing place to go to school. But oddly, I didn't learn very much about photography. I learned a lot about activism and art itself, which was great because since what I'd seen in Boston, watching people's openness to the external environment seal off towards Black folks was really still with me. So I began reading more African diaspora history and Dubois and his notions on the veil of consciousness that Black people consistently navigate, really honed in what I was beginning to grapple with. And I started to translate those metaphors into form using projections and sculptural installations, which are not very good, I will say now. And I knew they weren't very good then. And I think because I didn't have this long art background, it takes those 10,000 hours to be able to translate academic or intellectual ideas into representations that will connect to other people. And so this was, my first forays, my first year in art school. And Dubois talks about that veil of consciousness that he uses as a metaphor for the racial barriers. And the thing that really was fascinating to me, or the thing that I kept getting stuck on, is that it prevents not only other people from seeing Blacks as full Americans or humans, but how Black people see themselves through the eyes of that dominant society, which, yeah. And so he termed it double consciousness. And so this is a projection of, sorry, mic really close, a projection.
We need it close-ish.
Oh. This is a projection of an old signage that used to be up where the Dark Bay Horse Star and a mulatto girl will both be raffled for a chance at $1. And so I started projecting them onto shoe and form. Same, you've all seen that, emancipated image and I projected it onto this man's body, but because I didn't know much about photo yet, right? So I didn't realize how to get rid of the shadow, all of the technical things, right? Like I just wasn't quite there yet. But as I began to really get interested in that exhumation of historical record, both in the US and Hawaii, which was overthrown by the US government in 1893, and stripped of language, still to this day, like we're just starting to get to a point where it's being taught in universities because language was something that's considered culture and a way to connect people. And so as colonizers came in, they sort of outlawed it, right? But I really started to get interested in the concept of internalized disdain that so many people of color deal with in the Western world, and how it affects how we view ourselves and every relationship we have by extension, right? And so, particularly because I'm from a psych background, which is about like childhood self-perception and how that perception is shaped by experiences, nature and nurture, how your self-worth is taught by your parents. I connected that to how people of color, you know, even if you have really loving parents, when you go out into the world, if you're constantly told that reflection is that you're nothing or scary or tedious, whatever it is, how that gets internalized and, you know, creates some issues. So I loved being at Art Institute, SFAI, because they believe that in order to make better artists, we needed to be critical thinkers, which I think, and I've been to a bunch of schools, I think that SFAI was very amazing because of that specifically. I took a class with a native artist called Ed Burnham on the tribes in the US, which required 8-hour classes over a few weeks, you know, a bunch of classes, where we studied history and digging into layered oppression of American Indians. And for the last week, someone from the Apache tribe came and sat in with us and really started to tell the narrative from their perspective. And then we went to go live on the Apache reservation in Arizona, which has about 15,000 members living on site. So we camped out on their land and just basically lived on the reservation for weeks at a time, which I think there's this separation, like an academic separation, and this is true for psychologists and sociologists, where it's really easy to observe people from a distance until you live with them, and that all of a sudden, like the roots of your own colonization come up, which is absolutely what happened. Also, I found out that a lot of American Indians don't like Black folks, which was shocking to me because of the Buffalo Soldiers. And so I had to sort of grapple with what that meant, right? It was really easy at first to just sort of like brush it off, like, okay, well, my specific ancestors probably weren't Buffalo Soldiers, right? Which I think is what a lot of white America does. But I thought, what if I actually take that in, and what does that mean for me? Can I just hold that space and recognize that maybe my ancestors were shady, and just apologize and try to, you know, be there with them? And it, you know, and I think it worked out, and they're still family now. But I think having to take on that guilt for a second was very eye-opening. And I can understand why people want to run away from it versus it seemed much simpler to lean into it. So yeah, this is just some stuff that I shot on the res. It's meant to be more curious. And this kid is wearing a John Smith t-shirt from Disney's Pocahontas. And I was appalled. I was like, why does he? And his mom was just like, oh, it's just a t-shirt, that's fine. And I was like, is it though? Like, you bought that? I don't know. I just left it alone. And I was there was like maybe 6 other kids in the class. And one of them asked, and this lawn looked pretty cool, but one of them asked why there was so much trash in the front yard. There's always like bikes and dogs and like a ladder here and, you know, old basins and that kind of thing. And so we had to start to think about that is a Western conception of what a front yard should look like, right? It's simple little things, right? Where we are taught one thing and we imagine that it's right. And then we go to other people's homes and we're like, oh, that's not the way they do it. They must be dirty. They must be this. Versus they're just not Westerners in that way, right? This was Harlem. We started to, we had traveled a bit when I was younger, but I sort of started to question the hallmarks of colonization now as I traveled and how it affected each place. This is Dominican Republic. And how poverty is connected to slavery and assimilation and what are its effects. And at what point do we start to question the agency of the people that we see, when we go to the resort in their home country. This is just this kid who worked at our house. And this is all the first time that I had a camera and was in someone else's country, not just, on a holiday with my parents or something. And a bunch of times people would turn their backs, or this woman put her umbrella forward. She's turning away as well, right? Telling me to stop doing the thing that I'm doing. And I felt this just immense sense of voyeurism and just disgusting, right? And I felt that disparity really greatly. So I decided photojournalism wasn't for me at this point, right? Which is interesting to me that I then, many years later, came back to it. But at the time, I knew that it didn't feel good doing it. So back at art school, I started making more big installation pieces, which I don't have to show you because we didn't take photos back then, or I have maybe a couple, but they're like, on negatives. And I was like, oh, how am I gonna find the negative and print it, because I don't do this kind of work anymore, so I'm sorry. So I got into the student show on campus, and out of orthochromatic film, which it looks just like a piece of regular film, but you print a positive on it. So it just looks like a real print, but you can see through it like a negative. And so I used a bunch of 8x10s and I stitched them together by hand. And it was depicting a topless black man. And there were multiple layers in front of it and behind it because the whole thing was 6 feet. And so, a layer of like see-through Teflon, a layer of plastic, like different levels of opaqueness. And then I just put different words on each, at different parts, like Mandingo, dangerous, worker, father, nigger. And in the sign-up book, down at the bottom, again, this is my art school, San Francisco, everyone's an activist. I kind of asked people I thought there would be some engaging dialogue, and I thought that there would be a chance for reflection, but it turned out not to be that. In their book, there were just handwritten pages of slurs towards me, and keep beating that dead horse scribbled, which broke my heart, actually, because it was the first time that I was starting to do work that I felt like was touching on the things that I was really interested in, but I didn't have anyone to talk about them with. I was at school as well with the painter Kehinde Wiley, and we're all on the same show. And his work obviously denotes a black body, and his work got slashed, like they knifed it. The school paid for it to be restored. And Iona Waziel Brown, she just had large pencil marks scratched across her paintings. And it was all the same show, so it felt pointed, obviously. And I felt a little demoralized, partly because it was San Francisco, right? And I thought that I was in this sort of artsy leftist space. But I guess that is partly also my privilege and naivete showing through. So I still made installations about race and gender, but I decided that my technical skills weren't strong enough to really translate those thoughts. Also, my heart wasn't strong enough at that point to take the rejection, to be fair. This is probably true for you guys too, the thing that they didn't teach me in art school is that even if you like a particular type of work, you have to be okay with all the people that you're going to work with. And so if you're doing fine art, there is a type of personality that does really well in fine art because you're talking to gallerists and schmoozing and doing, and and it works out really well for people. If you want to be in fashion or commercial work, you have to be someone who is very gregarious and open and chatty, none of which are things that I am, by the way. Like, I tend to like hide out at my house for months at a time. And Kahinde, who's a friend, I had seen him with some gallerists, and his hustle was incredible. This guy, we're in undergrad, right? He had a 2,000 square foot space in San Francisco for free because a gallerist paid for his rent for 3 paintings a year. This dude was like 20 years old. What? Really, it's incredible. I do not have that kind of charm. It always feels disingenuous to me, particularly if there's a payoff at the end. I can talk for 5 hours with, some random person on a subway, but as soon as that person is offering me money or a job, I'm like, oh, I don't know how to, strange, which is a terrible choice if any of you, go the opposite way if you can. So I moved back to New York, and I began working as a custom printer for a while, and I worked on Gilles Ben-Simon's Paris retrospective, and just kind of kept my head down for a bit, realizing I was just going to be broke for a really long time. I went back to school at Parsons School of Design, which is where I teach sometimes, which seemed to be really technical. I learned strobes. I started assisting commercial editorial photographers. I didn't love the commercial world, but it seemed really simple. You just kind of go to work, you show up, they've picked models or someone for you to photograph. You don't have to think too hard about it. The light just has to be pretty, and then you go home, which, there didn't seem to this emotional hand-wringing, which really felt gratifying. This is Andrew Dosimu, who I started working for at some point, assisting, which was really pivotal for me because he merged this art sensibility with the commercial. And I had already been assisting very commercial photographers, which felt kind of dead inside to do the work. And his work sort of merges those two things, which I find really beautiful. And I traveled with him a bunch to Jamaica and Africa as an assistant, and it sort of helped me see beyond what was in New York and what was beyond what was being offered, because he sort of forged his own path. And at some point he started allowing me to help with castings, location scouting, shot ideas, that kind of thing, which also really helped. And I was working for a lot of modeling agencies at the time, because they were paying like $500, like, hey, can you just photograph this guy? And I just take a guy with like a couple t-shirts outside, and sure, which was a lot when I was younger, obviously. So I had a bunch of fashion stuff in it because that's who was paying me. And it was really easy to just knock off like Loma Vogue, right? Like it's daylight and you've got a pretty guy and he's wearing a white t-shirt. It's not rocket science, or it didn't feel that way to me at the time. And a nice location. And this is mostly daylight or like a tiny flash. But I wasn't head over heels for the work itself. But also, I kind of compared it to working in a factory. Like, does it matter? We all need jobs. I like food. And so maybe I could do this kind of work and it would be fine, because, you get to go home at the end of the day. But what I didn't realize is that, and this is all the same kind of stuff, that once you start to get on real fashion sets, you need to have that kind of personality to really care. I'm not that great at posing people. You can see I always have just like 2 shots, maybe 3, right? And so fashion photographers, it's not just, the hair, the clothes, the makeup, the lighting, and I'm really interested in lighting. It's really about how you can make this model in negative space, right, in a studio, feel alive and move and all of these things that I'm just not good at, actually, though I really like lighting. Which is great, because I would shoot men more often, specifically because guys don't do that much. Like, they're not doing this in every shot. They're just like, walking. I started to get hired for more portraits or stuff, and front of book fashion stuff, which they always need, right? It's this kind of easy day. It's like $1,000 a day to, they show up with clothes and he just makes a couple poses and it's really straightforward. Obviously my soul wasn't super engaged. Too cool for school, this guy. And then as I did more fashion-y kind of work, I started to see that I didn't really know how to move people, not in the way that's required to move up the ranks and to make, you know, an entire living off of it. Yeah, I loved people. I'm like, sit in a chair, great. Like, what? That's the extent. This is probably the one thing that I did that there was some movement. So then I started to get more portrait work, which I actually enjoyed a lot more. But I found out that I enjoy real people. Once there's, you know, a publicist and she likes the light from this side and it has to be high, so that it sort of took something away from me. Because you just get to make these moments in time, right? And kind of translate the humanity of the person to the audience, which I found really, really enjoyable, but harder to get unless you're just doing celebrity. Which, yeah, I don't have the constant, the like center for it, I think. So these are just and then I started just taking portraits for myself, because you always have to fill out your book. Me traveling. This is someone's auntie on the Swinomish res. Yeah, like, it's fine. The light's fine. But the work, of course, stopped being consistent. So it became hard to afford my lifestyle, obviously, because at some point you stop assisting. You're getting just enough work that you're like, yeah, cool, I can do this. And then, unless you're really close with a bunch of editors, it sort of dries up. So someone asked me, was out of town, it was like a snowstorm or something in New York, and asked if I could cover her doing production. Super easy gig, amazing. I did a bunch of stuff for American Express and I was in-house at Ralph Lauren and I don't think I have any more, and at Ann Taylor Loft. Because all of the things you learn, assisting and casting, is what you're doing, right? You just, it was really straightforward. I got to go to work and then I got to leave at the end of the day. I had a paycheck. This is the first time I've ever had a consistent paycheck in my entire life. And I shifted into art direction at some point. They merged the production role and the art direction role at Target Canada. And even cooler, I got to hire photographers, keep the entire team together, hire hair, makeup, work on the casting. I did pitch it to the client, but we shot 3 or 4 days a week in-house. And I got to talk about the light, help choose images without actually having to deal with the actual stress of trying to get work, which I don't like, obviously. And so it was, great. So I did that for like 2.5, 3 years, art direction at Target Canada. We got to go to work. We showed up at like 10, we left at 8. It was great. Paycheck just showed up. And then Target Canada, within a week, shuttered. They closed like 110 stores in Canada in a day. Everyone on the New York side, everyone in Minnesota, the entire Target Canada, they just decided to fold that part of their company because they weren't stocking shelves or something correctly, I don't know, in Canada. And so at the time, I just happened to be on holiday in Kenya and Tanzania. And it was like, I guess, December. I found out like mid-January, and I wasn't going to come back until the end of January. And so I got a severance package. And I was like, should I go to New York in the freezing cold winter, or should I stay in beautiful Africa? Obviously, I chose the continent. This is in Uganda. It was just at my hotel. I just had a cell phone because I was on holiday, right? Like, I'm not a photographer anymore. I don't have a laptop. I just have my iPhone, like 6. And there was a Mr. Kampala contest at my hotel. And because I'm a foreigner, amazing, the security was like, okay, you come, get on stage. I was like, oh, me? Yeah, oh, sure, yeah. So I got to photograph with my cell phone this entire contest. And yeah, I got to go backstage, like all of these things, which, the privilege was bananas. And then I just started tooling around. Nothing major in mind, again, just a cell phone. This is in Ethiopia, Bana tribe. They all wear mini skirts. Amazing. I was like, yeah. Mini skirts, these bands, like barrettes in their hair. And I was alone. This is in Kampala as well, Uganda. And I went up and down the coast in Kenya and into Tanzania, and then eventually ended up in Zanzibar, which I fell head over heels in love with. Partly because Kenya, a lot of places I was going to in Kenya are also Muslim, but they've been shifted apparently over the last 20 years by Islam in Saudi. And so the people aren't wearing color anymore. So like their hijabs are all black, which didn't seem as fun. It seems a ridiculous reason now, but at the time I was like, oh yeah, this part of Tanzania is so cool because they're much freer with their hijab and they're still wearing color, and they haven't shifted into Wahhabism. And so that was just like little kids go out during low tide and they pick out mollusks, like little tiny clams from the seabed, and then they'll take a bucket of them and boil them and eat them. That's in Senegal. Yeah, it's just like rolling around. Eventually a friend, like 7 months in or something, a friend from the States was coming and brought my camera and my laptop, which was nice. This is just a stone town, Zanzibar. This is Ethiopia. Their churches, they dug their churches out of stone. So you're actually really high up and you're looking down into this church that was created, they're incredible. Obviously, there's also the harsh realities of it. This is the hospital. I got sick once and was like, cool. I don't know if this was the best place to get treated. In Ethiopia, I went down to see these tribes. And I wasn't there to see them necessarily, but a guy on a bike was like, hey, I'll give you a ride if you want to, sure. So we went down, me on the back of this motorcycle, and he went to like do something with one of the tribesmen, and they were like, yeah, sure, you can take a picture. I felt disgusting again. I remembered that feeling of I am just this voyeur and poverty porn and right, like, what am I doing here? So I went back to Zanzibar and the beautiful ocean, and this stuff started to come up. This is in Senegal though. But for the very first time, it was around the same time Instagram was becoming big. And so I was posting things, and photo editor friends in the States were texting me and saying that this was the first time they ever saw me in my work. That usually everything they had seen prior to that was kind of dead, which made sense because that's how I felt about the work, right? And so I started to think about shifting to documentary work because I loved photographing this kind of stuff all the time. But documentary requires story, which I didn't really know how to go about. So this was my first foray into making a documentary story. I was living in a village that is conservative Muslim, but there was a brothel in the village, which was shocking to me. Like, wait, if I photographed this group of like heroin addicts during Ramadan, and I had a hijab on, I was completely covered, but this part of my wrists weren't covered. And these dudes are like smoking a glass dick, like, and they're yelling at me that I'm a whore because this part of my arms weren't covered. So I couldn't understand how they allowed a brothel in the village. So I found a guy who went there often, who's like a friend of a friend, and he just came with me, and we started going every weekend until the women let me photograph them. This is the bed that she works from. It's a bunch of konyagi bottles. Konyagi is It's like Cisco, I guess, like their local rum. It costs like $2 a bottle. This is a Saturday morning at maybe 5 a.m. So that's from Friday night. She was prepping. And they just hang up their used garments on the line. She had just finished with someone. It's the exterior. And it was so hot at some point that they just, like on a Tuesday night, they just dragged their mattresses out into the like little center area, I guess, like near a dance floor and the pool table. But everyone just kind of ignores them. And so those women are all Christians from the mainland. They're not Muslim. And so as long as they stay on property, the local women and higher ups don't do anything to them and don't shut down the brothel. I don't know. Strange. And that's the exterior of it. And so this is the first time. So I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just kind of making photos, figuring it out. And so I pitched this, I can't spell intersection apparently, but I pitched this story to Reuters because in Tanzania, there are so many NGOs because Tanzania is socialist. And so, Norway and all of those countries funnel money to them in their healthcare system. So within 2 miles of everyone's home, there is a healthcare center, like a little clinic, whatever that is, always. It costs to take a bus from like one end of the city to the other end of the island, costs about $2. It costs $1.75 to give birth in the hospital, right? So there's no reason, in my mind, that women and people weren't going to the health centers because they're paying into this health system. But in 90% of the cases, most people go to like witch doctors and traditional healers instead of going to hospital. And I couldn't understand why. And when I asked foreigners, they were like, yeah, they just, whatever, it's culture. And that just didn't seem like a great enough reason. And so I pitched this story to Reuters, and they picked it up and allowed me to work on it for like 6 months. And so and also a bunch of people go to these various imams who chant words from the Quran that is meant to burn the illness from you, because they actually believe, which I found fascinating, that illness is not just physical. It's actually spiritual, and that there is a spiritual jinn who's entered your body and is creating the illness. Which, wow, right? Like, I don't know if that's true or not. But so she was getting, there was an imam over her, and apparently it hurts a lot to let go of the jinn. And then I started focusing on babies, because there was one traditional healer that was just so impressive and really knew what she was doing. And so she mostly dealt with small children and pregnant mothers. And so this little guy has a herniated belly button, I guess. Basically, that your intestines start to push through the lining out of his belly. And so usually that's just like a quick 30-minute surgery in hospital. But the mom wouldn't go to hospital because she had another child who died there. And so that actually ended up being why so many people were going to traditional healers, is because the health services, even though they existed, were terrible. And everyone knew someone who died there. This was at the hospital. This gentleman, so essentially when you get hurt or injured, your family members have to move you from room to room or bring you sheets and bring you food. It doesn't happen in hospital. This is them praying, and a mom was over them, words from the Quran. And them trying to beat out the illness from these women and like yell fire basically over them. It's like a pharmacy. essentially, and they put the meds, which is usually like leaves and things, in women's purses. They don't put it in a bag, which I found really special. And so just two more of this story. This woman, I met her daughter's legs were paralyzed, and I met her at the traditional healer, and she was just getting herbs and she wasn't getting better. And so I asked if we could go to hospital. And she's like, yeah, it doesn't make sense, but we went anyway, and I started to understand more. So once we got in to see the doctor never physically examined this little girl. He just listened to the mom's story for like 2 minutes. And then he sent her up to x-ray. We went to the x-ray room, this is the x-ray, and then he looked at it and he's like, see, you can't see anything on the x-rays. She's fine, she'll just get over it. And then I asked some German doctors, told them the story, and they said, oh yeah, it's really common for children to get fevers that go really high, and then the parent, because the kids are shivering, the parents put them close to fire to warm them up or wrap them in blankets, and it actually causes nerve damage in their body. So you're never going to see that on an x-ray, right? X-rays don't show you nerves. And so the mom still thinks that the daughter is imbued with this jinn when actually she has nerve damage. They just don't have the medical facilities to diagnose. And this is the hospital filing room, which explains a lot, I think. How are we doing on time? Cool, I'm getting close. I'll go a little faster. This is in Sri Lanka. I covered, on Easter Sunday, 6 churches, 2 hotels were bombed at the same time by extremists. And so a lot of people died, particularly in various neighborhoods. Because a lot of the churches that were bombed, the people who went to those churches lived in those neighborhoods. So let's say in one neighborhood, like 212 people from one neighborhood died. And then, and that man, he went alone because his daughter wasn't feeling well. So the mom was like, oh, you just go, I'll stay home with our daughter. And he died. They laid out, I didn't show that slide, but they laid out the bodies in front of the church so you could identify your dead relative or spouse, and then you're allowed to go to the hospital afterwards. The whole city just went on lockdown. It was, really heartbreaking. Lots of children, it's Sunday morning at church. And so this is where the magazine, I was working for the Washington Post, stopped paying me. They were like, okay, this is the end of that story. But I was still in Sri Lanka. And so I stayed a little longer. And like 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, the majority of people in the main city began smashing up mosques and any Muslim-owned businesses in retaliation for the bombing, even though it was this like odd extremist group that had like 22 members, and burning down shops. This is the floor of a mosque in there. This is, in Senegal, there's coastal erosion, so all of these people whose homes are along the seashore are losing their homes. She has just these 2 walls remaining of her house, and so she still sits there with her children, even though she doesn't live there, looking out at the sea. That's what the entire coastline looks like. And their houses just fall into the water. So the government writes these numbers on people's homes, and then when your home gets to the point where it's no longer inhabitable, they'll move you to a tent city. That was her home too. So this is the tent city, which doesn't have running water. So everyone gets water from this donkey cart, or right corner, this is the tent city. They've put 3 or 4 families inside of one tent, which in the heat you can imagine gets really, really hot. There's no electricity, it's plastic. People are getting sicker because it's so arid. Their oldest cemetery is also flooding because it's sand. So no one really knows what they're going to do. And they're all fishermen, of course, right? Like generations of fishermen. As, obviously the Senegalese government has sold fishing rights to the Chinese, who come in with these massive trawlers and take all the fish. And so the fishermen are having to go out 3 or 4 days at a time to bring in like one haul. And now they also don't live by the sea, so they can't even tell what the conditions are each day, because the tent city is really far away. It's like an hour away. The French government pitched in a bunch of money to help build a seawall, and 3 years in, this is what it looks like. And this is the last slide of that. This is a city called Dune Babaye that 80,000 people lived in, and this was the center of town, which was completely covered with water. So they moved. This was really quick. During COVID, I got stuck in Vietnam. I was going on a 2-week holiday from Indonesia, and then they sealed the border. And because it's communist, because it's right on the southern border of China, everyone was really, really anxious about foreigners. I got kicked out. Everyone I know, actually lots of foreigners, got kicked out of whatever housing they were in because they got really scared about COVID, and it's a foreigner disease. But like 2 months in, like if I was walking down the road and across the street someone saw me, they'd be like, ah! Because I'm a foreigner and I was bringing the disease. I was like, I've been here for like 5 months. It's not, I'm good. But they would hang out with each other really close. This is in June. And I was shocked because I would talk to people in the States who were freaking out. There's no toilet paper, we can't find masks, what's going on? And they felt really safe. And so, yeah, everyone was just next to each other at these showers and at the beach every day, which I just started photographing because, like, they're sharing the same comb. This is like a communal comb. People just come over and do their hair. I came back at the end of COVID, and this single mom was going through chaos, and it was such an interesting distinction for me, being in a country in Vietnam where everyone takes care of each other, everything is about community, and then coming back to the States where the single mom, even at the end of COVID, it's like December, she can't allow anyone into her house, so she's actually not seeing anyone at all to help take care of her 3-year-old at the time. And she's working from home. At some point, she finally got him back into school, and she's just breaking under the pressure. And she let me move in with her for 6 weeks, as long as I, masked for the first week and all of the things. Her dog and her kid are like, we love you. She just started breaking, and then she goes back to work right at the end of that. This is something I'm working on now. It's just in the beginning stages, but I thought I'd throw it in Sudan. A lot of Sudanese, because of the war, have moved into Egypt. But because they're not legal, they're still working, but they make like $100 a month for working 40, 50 hours a week. And so a lot of families live together. Most people are really scared to go out the rest of the time because, they get busted by Egyptians. This guy was stabbed in his arm just for being Sudanese and walking down the road. Someone was just angry that he was there. So some Sudanese money. A family, she got attacked even though she's Christian. And so she started wearing hijab so that she fit in a little bit better. Yeah, and so basically, this is the last one. I just threw some portraits in there because if any of you are thinking about becoming documentary photographers, most of us at this point balance out the work with doing like those kinds of personal projects, reportage, and then like there's a lot of portrait work that gets done. Yeah, that's the end. Thanks.
Hi, Nikki. Thank you so much. I just really liked how honest and transparent you were about the journey that you went on through how you went to photograph and what you're photographing and is it in my nature to be schmoozing? Is this poverty porn? And I guess I'm curious, after Target and then between Target and the transition to photographing the brothel, I would love to hear more about how you went from the art direction to I don't know, maybe how do you,
Yeah, it was super organic, actually. I just happened to be, I was already in Tanzania on holiday for 6 weeks when I got everyone's laid off, and they gave me money. When you get laid off, they gave me a severance package. And so I was just there doing nothing. But there was so much beautiful things happening in front of me on the beaches, and I would just get on buses and go to different cities or towns or countries. To get from Kenya to Uganda, it was $21 on the bus. Cool, I'm gonna take a bus. And I had nothing on me, right? I have just a cell phone. I don't have a computer. I don't have anything, so I feel super chill. Even though, they speak English in Uganda, but in Kenya too. But yeah, and there was a lot of strange things that happened that you can't really tell anyone. And I didn't take a photo because I felt crazy pulling out my camera or my phone. This woman in Kenya, there's the women sit in one part, the men sit in another on the buses. And so at some point, the older women decided to adopt me, which was amazing. But then when I would get food, there's sellers coming through the window. And so I bought a mango with some pepper on it. And the woman in front of me was like, "Oh, you got that, great." And she took her grimy fingers and she took my mango and she took a whole section and just started eating it and then gave it, and I was like, cool. I don't know how to be in community. Right? Okay, I need to work through this, because at first I was just, who are you? Yeah, little things like that. And then, I started to, as you work through all that intellectually, and I just started to get more comfortable photographing and talking to people and being like, "Can I photograph you? You look so cool." And then, yeah, friends were like, "These are not terrible. You should."
And then you just pitched them and...
Yeah, and then I started pitching, but grants, right? Because it's hard to pitch, the New York Times has an international desk and there's one person who covers all of Southeast Asia. And so are you pitching, right? Those stories are harder to get picked up for them to pay you. And so first, you obviously need some stuff in your own book. So I was doing these low-hanging fruit stories, the brothel story, oh, it's right here. Okay, I can, and then you can start doing, and the documentary world is, and I'm assuming this is what you're asking, is so open and kind, especially compared to fashion, where everyone's like, whatever, I'm amazing. In documentary, people are like, you're gonna burn out. Let us help you before you burn out, right? Which is, yeah, so cool. And so there's all these programs and grants for young photographers. And so that Reuters grant was $5,000, which in where I was living, my rent was $280 a month.
Well, thank you for being in community with us tonight, sharing it.
I'll come to you next.
Thank you so much, Nikki. Really enjoy especially the documentary work that you're sharing and your use of color, especially. I think you have a great eye for that. And my question actually relates more to perhaps something that you still grapple with. I don't know. You can talk about the psychological transformation. You kind of flicked at it talking about situations that gave you maybe a feeling of ick or discomfort, and how, maybe because you're given, an assignment and there's, money exchange, things like that, you can focus a little bit more on that. But maybe if you could just expand a little bit more on how your feelings or the psychology around situations that you feel you have to document or compelled to document versus ones that you feel ooh, I can't even take my camera out.
So that malady of spirit story was the first one that I got paid for, and also because I had 6 months. And I kept seeing children in pain, and I would sit in this like clinic, I guess, with all them like the healers, sometimes giving out terrible advice, whatever. And I'm just this weird foreigner, like on the floor with a camera. Sometimes the husbands would be like, "What are you doing? You get," whatever. And I called my editor, like, "This is terrible. I don't want to go to do it anymore." And she explained that, one, to suck it up, cool, but that it's because I still perceive myself as an outsider. And if I keep going back over and over and over again, my interest is going to be so piqued that I kind of can't stop myself from picking up my camera. But the first like 4, 5, 6 times, don't bring a camera at all. Just go, just hang out, just be with people, allow them to connect to you and you to connect to them. And then slowly you can bring your camera in. And I think that was an incredible way to learn, because and it was just that, I didn't show some of the photos, the one where the imams would do this like laying of hands kind of thing, only happened 3 days a week or 2 days a week. And so I had like 5 days to like, that was a lot, okay. And then go back, because women are screaming and they're moaning and they're tearing things off and they're being hit, and it was a lot. But I just kept going over and over, and then eventually, I actually, sometimes when they started singing the duas at the beginning, I would sing with them. They, at some point, like, I'm wearing hijab and everything and I'm covered, but like my feet weren't covered because we all wear flip-flops, right? And you take them off at the door. And even some of the ladies would come and like put things over my feet, because my feet should also be covered, because I wasn't wearing socks because it's like 105 degrees every day. And so like little ways I started to recognize that I was accepted in the community and that I wasn't just like smash and grab. And so I work better in situations where I get to stay with people for longer versus like, hey, I'm gonna meet you for 20 minutes, which is what celebrity is, right? You pop in for 20 minutes, you light them, you get out. I do better because I get to show up with my full heart, and usually people sort of respond to that a little bit better.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Nikki. Thank you again. I think you started to touch on that subject of maybe access. So I'd love to learn more about how you found those intimate moments, how you were able to sit in spaces as a foreigner. I know that editors maybe had help, or whether you were on assignment or not, but maybe talk more about that access piece to get to the level of imagery that you did.
Yeah. I think in some countries, access is much harder. I tried to do a story in Colombia, and I was there for like 3 months, and I never got access. Like no one, because the people were so scared of what was retribution from like the various drug lords, no one would let me photograph them in their homes, unless they like came to my hotel room. I'm like, that's not going to work for a photograph. And so I think it becomes very specific to what country you're in. In Tanzania, because I lived there already, I had been living there for like a year before I pitched that story, and I had a fixer with me. I started hiring like a friend's cousin's sister, who spoke some English, but because she was a woman, she could go into female spaces with me, and she would just sit next to me and just make sure that I wasn't doing anything wrong, because that, was a big part of it. I was like, I don't know if this is okay for me to do. In Senegal, I photographed the cemetery, but at the same time, the person who was with me was like, you can take one photo and we have to leave because it's not appropriate. And so I think that being really aware of what is acceptable and isn't, and I think I was just like raised well as well, like honestly. There's a lot of photo cats that I see sometimes, particularly like in Sri Lanka at that bombing, who were pushing the camera really quickly into people's faces. without having built a rapport with them first. And they do really well. Like, bless them. So that's really hard for me. I'm like, let's be friends first. And you say it's okay that I pick up my camera, and you've given me that nod, and you're not like turning away from me. Yeah, I think you just make people your friends, which I think the hard part is at the end, where people are like, oh, you're my best friend. And they'll call you for months and months. Like in Egypt, people still call, and I left like 3 months ago or something. They still call, like, can you get me out of Egypt, like the Sudanese? I'm like, what? And I have to explain, like, the system in America is not like the system in most of Africa, where if you're fortunate enough to travel, that means that you probably know someone in immigration, and you know someone in government, and you know, right? Because that is that class issue. I'm like, no, regular people here can travel, but I don't know anyone in government. Like, I can't, like, what else can I do for you? And that part becomes really hard, right? Managing those expectations, one, when you're photographing, and then managing it at the end when you're leaving country and having to keep explaining, like, listen, I can help you with so many other things. I can help with, getting kids into the school or whatever that is. But yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, actually.
Long time no see.
It's one of my old students.
I just wanted you to touch on, after college, you transitioned into many different forms of photography. Can you talk about how you were able to kind of find your way into the art, sort of? I don't know if that makes sense. But
Find my way into art, or like
find your way into, like, you started off with, I guess, documentary or journalism, and then transitioned into commercial, and then back to journalism.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like when you graduate, you're just kind of like a young baby, in that you're like, cool, anything, give me money, right? Because again, food is amazing, and paying rent in New York is hard. And so if you start, and I think I interned. Did I intern at Mark Mann's? I interned at Keith Major, who's amazing, is a Black photographer in New York who also teaches at Parsons. And I don't know how I met him, but I think I just emailed him. I was like, hi, I love you, you're amazing. Can I pretty please? And he was like, yeah, you can't assist for me, but you can intern for me. And he let me intern for a bunch of weeks. I didn't know a thing. I'm the only chick on set. I'm like, can I just pick this? And there, it's like, there's all these other politics that get involved at that point. But he was such a good guy. And then as soon as I even understood how to use a reflector, he was like, I can't have you and not pay you, have you on set and not pay you. So then he just started paying me. And then I learned a bunch from the other assistants. And then and once you're an assistant and other people trust you, the first and second, they'll start referring you to other jobs, which is cool. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much. You know what I'm really struck by in the beginning, it was a really interesting use of the word privilege. When you said you were privileged, you were just honest and open, and it was just so crazy. The racism really just exists. So that really struck me, and it was just your ability to see the world in your eye was really, really interesting. It was really gratifying to hear and see this, and for you to. You see the sadness and the craziness in the world, and you capture it so well, and it's so important right now, because the deadness too. I mean, I was in the business that deadened me. I think a lot of people in this world, by what's going on, are deadened, and anything you can do to just
try to mitigate that.
Put any kind of break or light into the deadness is great. I'm just really grateful for having seen you and seen your work, and it's just really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, that's really kind. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Questions, comments? Last call. Hi, yes.
Thank you. As an American and a mixed race person, how was your experience in Africa, and how were you perceived? Were you perceived as Black? Like, how did that go? Also in all the different countries that you were, and with the different religions that you encountered?
That's a good question. Actually, it was really hard. I am not perceived as just Black. I am, particularly in East Africa, perceived as white, which filled me with fury, actually, for a while. And I have a Sudanese friend who was with me, but she was raised in the US, and another like French friend who's Senegalese. And I would who are darker skinned, and I would be like, this is bullshit. And they were like, haha, whatever, it's fine. I was like, the reason it's not fine is because I felt like it stripped so much of who I am and how I perceive myself in the world away from me, right? And they don't mean white like, Caucasian white. They mean white like Arab white. And Arabs in Egypt call themselves white. But because, and I went to South Africa with a Puerto Rican DJ ages ago, and the same thing happened. He was DJing a party with Black folks, and I dance and I'm laughing and I'm talking to the people, and all of the browner people in the room did not mess with me. They were like, cool, we don't know you, and they would back away. And we went to another party that was a colored party with everyone who's beige, and everyone was super open and receptive and talking to us, and it was so obvious. Even at the chicken place, they were like, oh, until they heard our accents, because obviously when they were colonized, the anger is between the colored people who are mostly like Cape Malay, not like mixed Black and white, and the Black people, and so Black people and colored people don't mix. And I'm Black because I'm from America, right? We don't have all those gradations. I mean, I guess in the South we do, but certainly not in New York. And so yeah, I was furious for a while, actually. And then it's like cappuccino, blah, blah, blah. But even more than that, because I'm beige, I'm considered pretty. I could stand next to the most beautiful Ethiopian woman I've ever seen in my life, and someone would say that I was pretty, and I was like, what have you seen? Oh, I'm 2 shades lighter than she is. Got it, okay, like that automatic. And so I had to, you grab it, but there's a privilege in that, right? Like, it's not like I was suffering and they were being cruel to me. Actually, people were kinder because I was light, which is still, infuriating. You're like, what the, and in Asia, it depends on the Asia, like in Indonesia where they're brown, no, it's perfectly fine. In Vietnam, they were like, you are so dark. Ew. Why? Ew. What are you doing? I never got hit on once. Yeah, nothing. Yeah, those kinds of things happen. Yeah, and so I think what's happened ultimately is that I've started to learn to hold my center, which I think all of us as artists need to do anyway, right? Where, in one country I'm absolutely ugly, in another country I'm super pretty. Neither of those things are true, right? Like, I'm just me, and so just recognizing it's all bullshit, right? Yeah. Which is the same thing that we have to think about with our art, right? Where someone tells you your work is terrible and someone says your work is amazing. You just have to be able to hold your center and sort of recognize that, whatever you have to say is the thing that's interesting and that's authentic. And yeah, I'm babbling. Sorry. Yeah. Hi.
Last one. All right. Huge round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. So fun. Thank you.